The kitchen clock ticked louder than it should have, each second slicing through the quiet of the house. I stood at the counter, my hands buried in a pile of half-chopped carrots, the knife heavy in my grip. The kids' laughter had faded hours ago. They were upstairs, probably tangled in their own worlds of homework and screens. Tom was still at the office, chasing deadlines that never seemed to end. The carrots blurred under my stare, their orange edges softening as my eyes stung. Not from crying. Not yet. Just that ache, the one that had settled in my chest months ago, maybe years, like a stone I couldn't quite dislodge. I set the knife down, my fingers lingering on its worn wooden handle. It was my mother's, one of the few things I'd kept after she passed. She'd always said a good knife could fix anything: soups, arguments, lonely evenings. I wanted to believe her tonight. I wanted to believe that if I just kept chopping, kept moving, the feeling would pass. That slow, steady gnawing that something was missing. Not the big things, Tom, the kids, this house with its creaky floors and 2 small windows. No, it was something else. A piece of me I couldn't name anymore. One that used to hum with color and ideas, that used to feel free. The back door creaked open, and Ellie's voice cut through the haze. "Mom," Ben's hogging the tablet again. My 7-year-old stood there, her ponytail lopsided, one sock missing. Her cheeks were flushed from running, and her eyes held that spark of indignation only a sibling fight could ignite. I wiped my hands on the dish towel, the fabric rough against my palms, and forced a smile. "All right, let's sort it out." Upstairs, Ben sprawled across his bed, the tablet glowing against his face. At 10, he was all elbows and opinions, his dark hair falling into his eyes the way Tom's used to when we first met. "It's my turn," he muttered, not looking up. She had it all morning. Ellie crossed her arms, her foot tapping the carpet. Did not. I knelt between them, my knees pressing into the worn rug. "Guys, come on. Share, or it's going to bed early for both of you." My voice sounded steady, but my hands were restless, twisting the hem of my sweater. They grumbled, but Ben slid the tablet toward Ellie, who snatched it with a triumphant huff. I stayed there a moment, watching them settle into their truce, their heads bent close, already forgetting I was there. Back in the kitchen, the carrots were still waiting, the clock still ticking. I picked up the knife again, but my hands wouldn't move. Instead, I saw Ellie's crooked ponytail, Ben's stubborn frown, and felt that tug in my chest, sharp, warm, overwhelming. I loved them so much it hurt sometimes, like my heart was too full to hold it all. And yet, that other ache was still there, quieter but stubborn, whispering that I'd lost something along the way. Not them. Never them. But me. The me who used to paint late into the night, who laughed too loud at Tom's bad jokes, who felt alive in a way I couldn't quite remember anymore. The front door opened and Tom's voice called out, "I'm home." His keys clattered onto the hall table, a sound as familiar as my own heartbeat. I turned, catching his silhouette in the doorway. Tired eyes, loosened tie, the faintest smile when he saw me. "Rough day?" he asked, stepping closer. His hand brushed my arm, warm and steady, and for a moment, I wanted to lean into him, to let his presence anchor me. Instead, I nodded, my throat tight. Just long. I didn't know how to explain the rest, didn't know if I even understood it myself. He didn't push, just squeezed my shoulder and headed upstairs to check on the kids. I listened to his footsteps fade, the murmur of their voices blending into the house's hum. The carrots were still there, the knife still in my hand, but all I could think was how much I loved this life. Tom, Ellie, Ben, this messy, ordinary home, and how it still wasn't enough to fill that quiet, aching gap inside me. I set the knife down again, my fingers trembling just enough to notice. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, their shadows dancing across the kitchen window. I pressed my palm to the cool glass, grounding myself in its chill. I didn't know what I was looking for, not yet. But standing there, with the echoes of my family around me, I felt the first stirrings of something, a question, maybe, or a need. To find that missing piece, to remember who I'd been before the days blurred together. For them. For me. The attic smelled of dust and forgotten summers, a mix of old wood and something faintly sweet, like the ghost of my mother's lavender sachets. I stood at the top of the narrow stairs, my hand still on the banister, the flashlight beam slicing through the dimness. Below, the house was quiet. Tom had taken Ellie and Ben to soccer practice, leaving me with an hour, maybe 2, before the chaos of dinner and bedtime swept me up again. I hadn't planned to come up here. I'd meant to fold laundry, answer emails, do something useful. But my feet had carried me past the laundry basket, up the creaking steps, as if they knew something I didn't. I couldn't shake that feeling, the one that had been clawing at me for weeks, maybe longer. It wasn't sadness, not exactly, just a hollowness, like I'd misplaced a part of myself I couldn't name. I'd tried to ignore it, to fill the gap with packed lunches and carpool schedules, but it clung to me, stubborn as damp air. Up here, though, the world felt quieter, like I could finally hear my own thoughts. I swept the flashlight across the attic, its beam catching on cardboard boxes, a cracked mirror propped against the wall, a tangle of Christmas lights we hadn't used in years. My chest tightened, not with fear but with something heavier, a need to do something, anything to make sense of the ache. I stepped forward, the floorboards groaning under my weight, and knelt beside an old storage box tucked under the eaves. It was one of Tom's, or maybe mine from before we married, its corners softened by time, the label smudged but still legible, miscellaneous, keep. I traced the word with my fingertip, the cardboard rough against my skin. Why had I come here? I didn't know. But my hands moved anyway, tugging the box closer, prying open the flaps with a faint creak. Dust swirled in the flashlight's glow, catching in my throat, and I coughed, my eyes watering. Inside, a jumble of things stared back at me, things I hadn't thought about in years. There was a sketchbook, its cover warped from some long-ago spill, the edges curling like dried leaves. I lifted it out, my fingers brushing the rough canvas binding, and flipped it open. My own handwriting stared back, swirling, reckless loops from a version of me I barely remembered. Pages of half-finished drawings spilled out. A tree with roots that twisted into words, a woman's face dissolving into stars, a skyline that bled into the margins. My breath caught sharp and sudden. I used to draw like this, late at night when the world was asleep, when ideas poured out faster than I could catch them. When had I stopped? I couldn't pinpoint the day, the month, the year. It had slipped away like water through my fingers. I set the sketchbook aside, my hands trembling just enough to notice, and reached back into the box. A Polaroid slid out, its edges yellowed, the image faded but unmistakable. Me and Tom, younger, laughing on a pier somewhere, the ocean glinting behind us. My hair was loose, tangled by the wind, and his arm was slung around my shoulders, his grin wide and unguarded. I touched the photo, my thumb grazing the glossy surface, and felt a pang so sharp it stole my breath. Not for him, we were still us, still solid, but for that girl, the one who laughed so easily, who felt the world like a pulse under her skin. Where had she gone? The attic seemed smaller now, the air thicker. I dug deeper, my movements faster, less careful. A chipped ceramic mug, one-eyed, painted with clumsy daisies during a pottery class I'd taken on a whim. A bundle of letters, tied with a frayed ribbon, my mother's slanted cursive promising she'd visit soon. A mixtape with Tom's handwriting on the label, songs he'd picked for our first road trip together, when we'd driven until dawn just because we could. Each item was a shard of something I'd buried, something I'd let fade under the weight of carpools and grocery lists. My hands stilled, the mixtape heavy in my palm, and I pressed my lips together, fighting the burn in my eyes. Why did I stop? I whispered, the words slipping out before I could catch them. The attic swallowed the sound, but it lingered in my chest, heavy and raw. I didn't know what I meant, not exactly. Stop drawing? Stop dreaming? Stop being the person who felt alive in her own skin? I clutched the mixtape tighter, the plastic case digging into my palm, and felt the ache shift, no longer just a void but something sharper, something that wanted answers. I leaned back against the wall, the wood cool through my sweater, and closed my eyes. The flashlight beam wavered, casting shadows that danced across the rafters. I thought of Ellie's lopsided ponytail, Ben's stubborn frown, Tom's tired smile when he walked through the door. I loved them so much it hurt, but loving them hadn't been enough to keep that other part of me alive. The part that used to stay up sketching until my hands ached, that used to feel the world like a song I could hum along to. I'd let it slip away piece by piece without even noticing. The box sat open in front of me, its contents spilling across the floor like a map of who I'd been. I picked up the sketchbook again, my fingers tracing the curve of a half-drawn tree. Something stirred in me, faint but stubborn, like a spark in damp kindling. Not an answer, not yet, but a question, a need to know if that girl was still in me somewhere, waiting to be found. I hugged the sketchbook to my chest, the edges pressing into my ribs, and took a slow, shaky breath. The attic was still, but inside me, something was moving, waking up. Downstairs, the front door opened, and Ellie's voice rang out, sharp and bright. "Mom, we're back." Ben's footsteps thudded after her, Tom's low laugh weaving through their chatter. I blinked, the spell of the attic breaking, and set the sketchbook down, careful, like it might bruise. I stood, brushing dust from my jeans, and glanced back at the box, its contents glinting in the flashlight's glow. I wasn't done here, not with the box, not with myself. But for now, I turned toward the stairs, toward the pull of my family, carrying that spark inside me, fragile but alive. The rain started just after dinner, a soft patter against the windows that grew into a steady drum. I stood at the sink, scrubbing a pan crusted with lasagna, my hands moving on autopilot while my mind churned. The kids were in the living room, their voices rising and falling over a board game, punctuated by Ellie's indignant squeals and Ben's smug laughter. Tom was at the table, his laptop open, the glow catching the lines around his eyes. The house felt alive, warm, full. But inside me, the spark from the attic was flickering, pressed under the weight of something heavier. That photo, the one of us on the pier, kept flashing in my mind, my wild hair, Tom's easy grin, the way the world had felt so wide open then. I didn't know how to get back to her, to that version of me. And the not knowing was starting to feel like a fight I wasn't sure I could win. I set the pan down, the sponge slipping from my fingers, and dried my hands on the dish towel, its threads catching on my cracked knuckles. My chest was tight, like I'd been holding my breath too long. I glanced at Tom, his fingers pausing on the keyboard, and felt a pang. Not anger, not blame, just a quiet ache that we'd both let the years blur us into this. Routines. Roles. Mom, Dad, the ones who kept it all together. I loved it, I did, but loving it didn't stop the hollow from growing, didn't stop me from wondering if I'd traded too much of myself to make it work. Mom, it's your turn. Ellie's voice snapped me back, sharp and impatient. I turned to see her leaning over the couch, her braids swinging, holding out a pair of dice like they were a lifeline. Ben smirked, sprawled on the rug, clearly winning. I forced a smile, my lips stiff, and started toward them, but my eyes caught on something else. The sketchbook, tucked on the counter where I'd left it after the attic. Its warped cover seemed to pulse under the kitchen light, daring me to pick it up, to open it, to face whatever it held. I stopped, my bare feet cold against the tile, and my hand reached for it before I could think. The cover was rough under my fingertips, heavier than it should have been. I flipped it open, and there it was again, that tree, its roots twisting into words I couldn't quite read anymore. My throat tightened, and I traced the lines with my thumb, the pencil smudges faint but stubborn, like they'd been waiting for me all this time. I didn't hear Ellie call again, didn't hear Tom's chair scrape back. All I heard was my own pulse, loud and uneven, and the rain, louder now, hammering the roof like it wanted in. Why'd you stop? The words slipped out, soft but jagged, not meant for anyone but me. I pressed my palm against the page, hard, like I could pull something out of it. Answers, maybe, or just proof that I hadn't imagined her, that girl who'd drawn this, who'd felt the world like it was hers to shape. My eyes burned, and I blinked fast, willing the tears back, but they came anyway, hot and silent, slipping down my cheeks and onto the paper. Hey! Tom's voice was close, low, cutting through the fog. I flinched, shutting the sketchbook too fast, my hands fumbling like I'd been caught. He was beside me now, his sleeve brushing my arm, his brow creased in that way it got, when he wasn't sure what he'd walked into. You okay? I nodded, too quick, swiping at my face with the back of my hand. Fine. Just tired. The lie tasted sour, and I hated it, hated how easily it came. His eyes lingered on me, searching, and for a moment I thought he'd push, thought he'd ask what was really going on. But Ellie's voice rang out again. Dad, tell her to hurry up. And the moment broke. He squeezed my shoulder, his touch warm but fleeting, and turned back to the kids. I stood there, the sketchbook still under my hand, my breath shallow and uneven. The rain was relentless now, a roar that drowned out the game, the laughter, everything. I looked at the sink, the dishes still piled up, then at the living room, where Ellie was shaking the dice with both hands, Ben grinning like he'd already won. I loved them, God, I loved them, but right then I couldn't move toward them. I couldn't keep pretending the ache wasn't there, couldn't keep shoving it down like it didn't matter. It did matter. I mattered. I grabbed the sketchbook, my fingers gripping it so tight the edges bent, and slipped out the back door before I could change my mind. The rain hit me hard, cold and sharp, soaking my sweater in seconds. I didn't care. I ran across the yard, my sneakers sinking into the mud, until I reached the shed, Tom's old workshop, the one we'd meant to fix up but never did. The door stuck, swollen from years of neglect, but I shoved it open, the wood scraping my palm. Inside, it smelled of damp earth and rust, the air thick with disuse. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, its light weak but enough. I set the sketchbook on the workbench, my hands shaking. Not from the cold, not entirely. The rain pounded the roof, a rhythm that matched the thud in my chest. I opened the book again, and there she was, the tree, the stars, the woman dissolving into light. My drawings, my hands, my heart, all of it from a time when I hadn't been afraid to want more. I pressed my fingers to my mouth, stifling a sound I didn't want to name, and felt the tears come again, faster now, unstoppable. Why did I let you go? I whispered, my voice breaking, barely audible over the storm. I wasn't just talking to the drawings, not really. I was talking to her, to me, to the part I'd buried under years of lunches and laundry and love that had asked too much of me. I'd thought letting her go was what I had to do, to be a good mom, a good wife, to keep everything from falling apart. But standing there, soaked and shivering, I saw it clear as the rain. Losing her hadn't saved anyone. It had just left me half alive, carrying a hole I couldn't ignore anymore. I reached for a pencil, its tip dulled, left in a jar on the shelf years ago. My hand hovered over the page, trembling, the paper already curling from the damp. I didn't know what I was doing, didn't know if I could even draw anymore, but I pressed the pencil down anyway. A single line, shaky but real. It felt like breathing for the first time in years, sharp, painful, alive. Another line, then another, the tree's roots growing under my hand, twisting into something new. I didn't stop, didn't think, just let it come, let her come, the girl who'd never really left, just waited. The shed door creaked, and I froze, the pencil slipping in my grip. Tom stood there, rain dripping from his hair, his eyes wide with something I couldn't read, worry maybe or surprise. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, his voice soft but edged, like he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. He stepped inside, the rain following him, pooling on the floor. I looked down at the sketchbook, the new lines stark against the old, and felt my throat close up. I could have lied again, could have said I was just clearing my head, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I turned the book toward him, my hands unsteady, showing him the tree, the roots, the piece of me I'd just started to claw back. "I'm trying to find her," I said, my voice raw, barely mine. "The me I used to be. I don't know if I can, but I have to try." His eyes moved from the page to me, and for a moment he didn't speak, just stood there, rain-soaked and silent. I braced myself, waiting for him to brush it off, to tell me I was being dramatic, that we had a life, a good one, and wasn't that enough? But he didn't. He stepped closer, his shoes squeaking on the wet floor, and reached out, his fingers brushing mine where they held the book. "Okay," he said, quiet but sure. "Then we'll figure it out. Together." I stared at him, my breath catching, the pencil still clenched in my hand. The rain hadn't stopped, but inside me something shifted, a knot loosening, a spark flaring brighter. I didn't have answers, didn't know what came next, but for the first time in too long, I felt like I was choosing myself, not just surviving. I nodded, my lips trembling into something like a smile, and turned back to the page, the tree waiting for me to keep going. The morning was soft, the kind of quiet that feels like a gift after a long night. I sat on the back porch, my bare feet brushing the cool wood, a mug of coffee warming my hands. The air smelled of damp grass and the faint sweetness of blooming jasmine, carried on a breeze that tugged at the hem of my sweater. Ellie and Ben were still asleep, their rooms silent upstairs, and Tom had left early for a meeting, his kiss lingering on my forehead like a promise. The sketchbook lay open on my lap, its pages fluttering slightly, the tree I'd started in the shed now sprawling across 2 sheets, its roots deeper, wilder, curling into shapes I hadn't planned. I traced one with my fingertip, the pencil smudge rough against my skin, and felt something settle in me. Something small but steady, like a stone finding its place in a riverbed. It had been a week since the shed, since I'd stood there, rain-soaked and raw, letting the pencil move like it was pulling me back to myself. I hadn't drawn much since, not for lack of wanting, but because I was learning to let it come slowly, to trust it wouldn't slip away again. The ache was still there, that yearning for the girl I'd been. The one who felt freer, brighter, connected to a joy I could almost taste, but it wasn't a wound anymore. It was a map, maybe, or a compass, pointing me toward something I was only starting to understand. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness sharp on my tongue, and watched the sky lighten, pale gold spilling over the treetops. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to outrun the feeling. I was sitting with it, letting it breathe. The porch door creaked, and I turned to see Ellie, her pajamas wrinkled, her hair a tangle of curls. She rubbed her eyes, squinting against the morning light, and shuffled toward me, her socks mismatched as always. "You're up early," she mumbled, climbing into my lap without asking, her weight warm and solid. I set the mug down, wrapping my arms around her, her head tucking under my chin. She smelled of sleep and that faint, sweet scent that was just her, and I pressed my lips to her hair, my chest tightening. Not with pain, but with something fuller, softer. Couldn't sleep, I said, my voice low, careful not to break the moment. She reached for the sketchbook, her small fingers brushing the page, and tilted her head, studying the tree. What's this? She asked, her tone curious, not demanding, the way only a half-awake kid can manage. I hesitated, my hand still on her back, feeling the rise and fall of her breath. Just something I'm working on, I said finally, the words feeling truer than I'd expected. Something I used to do a lot. She nodded, like it made perfect sense, and traced a root with her fingertip, her nail catching on a smudge. It's cool, she said, then yawned, curling closer, her weight anchoring me to the moment. We sat like that for a while, the world waking up around us, birds chirping in the yard, a neighbor's lawnmower humming in the distance. I looked down at the sketchbook, at Ellie's hand still resting on the page, and felt a quiet shift inside me. I'd spent so long thinking I had to choose, between them and me, between the life I loved and the person I'd lost. But maybe it wasn't about choosing. Maybe it was about letting both exist, letting myself grow without trying to control every piece of it. I hugged Ellie tighter, my throat thick, and she squirmed, giggling softly. Too tight, Mom, she said, but she didn't pull away. The door creaked again, and Ben appeared, his hair sticking up, his eyes bleary. Why's everyone out here? He grumbled, flopping onto the porch swing, his lanky legs dangling. He spotted the sketchbook and raised an eyebrow, a smirk tugging at his lips. You drawing again? Thought you said you were bad at it. I laughed, the sound surprising me, light and real. I am bad at it, I said, glancing at the tree, its messy lines staring back. But I'm doing it anyway. He snorted, but there was something in his eyes, curiosity, maybe, or just that quiet way he had of watching when he thought I wasn't looking. He kicked the swing into motion, the chains creaking, and for a moment we were just there, the three of us, tangled in the morning's stillness. When Tom came home that evening, the house was a mess, dishes in the sink, crayons scattered across the kitchen table where Ellie had decided to help with my sketchbook. I was at the counter, chopping peppers for dinner, the knife moving slower than it should have, my mind half on the drawing I'd started after lunch. A clumsy attempt at Ellie's face, her curls spilling like vines. Tom dropped his bag by the door, his tie already loose, and leaned against the counter, watching me. Good day, he asked, his voice soft, like he was testing the air between us. I set the knife down, wiping my hands on my jeans, and turned to face him. His eyes were tired but warm, the kind of steady I'd always leaned into, even when I didn't know how to say it. Yeah, I said and meant it. I drew today. With Ellie. It was nice. My voice caught, just a little, and I looked down, my fingers twisting the dish towel. I'm trying, Tom. To find her again. Me, I mean. He stepped closer, his hand brushing mine, his thumb grazing my knuckles. I know, he said, quiet but sure, like he'd been carrying that truth for me all along. And I'm here. Whatever it takes. I looked up, meeting his gaze, and saw it. The man who'd laughed with me on that pier, who'd stayed through every late night and lost dream, who was still choosing us, choosing me. I squeezed his hand, my lips trembling into a smile, and for a moment, the kitchen felt bigger, like it could hold all of us. Them, him, and the me I was starting to uncover. Later that night, after the kids were in bed, I slipped into the shed again. The air was cool, the rain long gone, replaced by a sky so clear I could see stars through the dusty window. I opened the sketchbook, my hands steadier now, and picked up the pencil, its weight familiar, like an old friend. I didn't draw right away, just sat there listening to the quiet, feeling the pulse of my own breath. The tree was still there, its roots sprawling, but it wasn't finished, and I didn't need it to be. It was enough to keep going, to let each line lead me somewhere new. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to hold everything together, schedules, meals, everyone's needs but mine. I'd thought control was the answer, that if I just planned enough, loved enough, I could keep the ache at bay. But it hadn't worked. The ache had grown, quiet but relentless, until it forced me to look at it, to see what I rosin pan and the loom of fate. I'd thought I could fix it all, make everything perfect, but perfection wasn't the point. I didn't need to control the chaos. I needed to live in it, to let myself want things again, to let myself feel the joy I'd buried. I wasn't that girl from the pier anymore, not exactly, but she was still in me, her spark flickering, her courage growing. I was finding her, not by forcing it, but by choosing myself one messy, imperfect line at a time. I set the pencil down, my fingers smudged with graphite, and leaned back, the shed's wooden chair creaking under me. Outside, the night was still, the stars bright against the dark. I didn't have all the answers, maybe I never would. But sitting there with the sketchbook open, the house asleep, I felt it, a quiet joy, small but real, like a seed taking root. It wasn't the wild, fearless kind I'd known before, but it was mine and it was enough. I closed the sketchbook, my hands steady, and stood, brushing dust from my jeans. The path ahead wasn't clear, but it didn't need to be. I'd keep drawing, keep growing, not to escape my life but to live it fuller. Tom's hand in mine, Ellie's laughter, Ben's smirk, and me finally free to be all of it, to be whole. I stepped outside, the grass cool under my feet, and looked up at the sky, its vastness stretching wide. I smiled soft and true and let the night hold me, just as I was. As I stood there under the endless sky, the cool grass anchoring me to the earth, I felt the weight of the sketchbook still lingering in my hands, its pages a quiet promise. The stars blinked above, steady and patient, and in their light I finally understood. Not everything lost could be reclaimed, but what I'd found was enough. Each line I'd drawn, each moment I'd chosen myself, was stitching me back together, not into the girl I'd been, but into someone new, someone who could love this life fiercely and still reach for more. I took a deep breath, the air sharp with the scent of jasmine, and let it settle in me. This was my beginning, messy and real, and I was ready to walk it, one step, one sketch, one heartbeat at a time.